Welcome to the Four Worlds podcast from Tomorrow's World Today. We're diving into the latest in tech, science, and sustainability, from nature's mysteries in the world of inspiration to the hands-on crafts of creation, the bold breakthroughs of innovation, and the scaled-up wonders of production. This is your ticket to the stories shaping tomorrow. Welcome to another episode of the Four Worlds podcast. Today we're going down the road less traveled with artist and photographer Lucas Foglia. Lucas's work captures people in nature and explores different cultures around the world. Lucas, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and I kind of gave people just a brief explanation of who you are, what you do. Give the audience a little insight of who Lucas is and kind of what you do.
Sure. I mean, from the ground up, I travel around the world. I collaborate with communities and make photographic projects that talk about our relationship with nature. I share those photographic projects in books, in exhibitions, in articles in the news, and public installations around the world.
Yeah, and just checking out your website, you do some great work. I want to, just explain that right off the bat. And anyone listening after the episode, I advise anyone to go check out your website, and we'll kind of get that dealt with a little later. We'll talk about where people can find you and everything. But you do some fascinating work, and I'm interested, how has that work kind of evolved over the years, and what kind of themes or strategies kind of remained consistent as you continue your work?
Well, I'd say that my life metaphorically feels like a tree where the roots are my background. And I grew up on a small family farm east of New York City on Long Island, surrounded by forest. So I grew up close to nature and also watched housing developments around us change the wild land that I knew well. And my photographic projects are like the trunk of a tree, where I'm using photography to look at something in the world that I want other people to look at, and I also want to understand for myself. Mm-hmm. The branches that grow out from that tree and support the tree are the ways in which I share the project with the world, right? The book, the exhibitions and galleries and museums, public installations, etc. The biggest picture, I worry that our view of nature is that nature is broken. Mm-hmm. And I don't think nature is broken. I think we are changing it and it is changing us. Mm-hmm. And we are a part of nature. The stories I see in the art world and in journalistic world as well often reference wild places as either pristine escapes, you can go on vacation to a magical island, or as broken because of people, right? Climate change, human disturbance in the landscape, etc. The projects I do focus on the interrelationship between people and nature. Mm-hmm. And most recently, I followed the discovery of the longest butterfly migration, painted lady butterflies flying from Kenya to Norway and back again each year. And the reason I followed those butterflies is I saw in painted lady butterflies a lesson of resilience and adaptation in the face of change.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the reception? Is that something that you've gotten feedback on? How did people kind of respond to that? Did they share the same thoughts that you have, or, what were your thoughts behind it?
I'm grateful for the reception so far. Mm-hmm. Whenever I start sharing a project with the world, it hooks the news in some way. Mm-hmm. And when I started following butterflies, I thought about it as a story about butterflies. Now, as the book has been shared with the world and been reviewed in the press and at gallery and museum exhibitions in multiple countries, the response to the book has been a celebration of the longest butterfly migration and of how painted lady butterflies mm-hmm. travel over 10 generations between countries and continents, from Central Africa to Northern Europe and back again. And also, there's a message in the butterfly about connectedness across borders in a time around the world in which a lot of countries are isolating themselves. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the politics within countries speak about isolation and borders as very hard things. So it's been a surprise to me to see this project that I've made, Constant Bloom, about the longest butterfly migration, be covered both for the butterflies and for what they say about borders.
I'm glad you're on here to talk about that. Some people may not, obviously think that way. And on your site, in addition to Constant Bloom, you have a couple other projects. You have Human Nature, Front Country, and A Natural Order. The ones that I saw on your website. What messages does your work and these projects send to an audience? You covered Constant Bloom a good bit. What about the other ones? What were you kind of exploring during these projects?
For each of my projects, I look for a starting point that's specific and intimate,
Mm-hmm.
from which I can talk about big world issues through beautiful photographs. So A Natural Order, my first project, looked at people who left cities and suburbs to live off the grid as self-sufficiently as they could in land that is relatively wild in the southeastern United States.
Mm-hmm.
I shared that project in 2012 as the world was recovering from the global economic recession.
Right.
And so there was a counterpoint of, while people were worried about money and big bank bailouts, I was sharing a story about people living close to nature in such a way that they didn't need money.
Mm-hmm.
Front Country, my second project, looked at the rural American West, an area that's famous for being the Wild West. And I focused on industries of being a cowboy or being a miner in those areas to show the tension between the wildness that the region is famous for and the jobs that allow people to live there that also take away from its wildness.
Mm-hmm.
Human Nature, my third book, looked at how and why we need wild places. So I collaborated with climate scientists and neuroscientists to measure how nature affects us and how we affect nature. And I highlighted programs in different parts of the country, the US and the world, that were trying to connect and interconnect people with the landscape we depend on.
And when you're listing all of these projects and where have you've went, the different faces and the different cultures that you've met and worked with for these projects, how do you kind of ingrain yourself within their culture, if you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the story I just gave were like big picture stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I said in the beginning that I always start with a point of intimacy, right? So for instance, with Constant Bloom, my most recent book, I shared with people as I traveled that I was following butterflies. And I collaborated with the scientists who were proving the longest butterfly migration.
Yeah.
From that, I was able to meet communities as I traveled following the butterflies. I made friends. I stayed over in people's houses. I'm still in touch with many of the people I photographed. I gave them each a copy of their photograph first before it was shared with the world. And so I start with something specific, like painted lady butterflies on the longest butterfly migration. And from that, I can talk about bigger issues like how the world is changing.
Yeah, it's fascinating work, and it really does, just to give the audience kind of an idea and where have you been. I mean, it spans from Kenya to the grounds of Rikers Prison in New York to the backwoods of Tennessee and North Carolina, and with all of these different locations and you explaining, what you've done in these places. What are some of those similarities and how are all of these places different at the same time?
I want to share too. So, like, this is an unusual conversation for me because we're talking about multiple projects at once,
Sure.
right? So, all those locations you just mentioned were specific locations within
Right, for
diverse
different
projects I've worked on.
Mhm.
Rikers Island jail complex, for instance, is a place that's famous for its violence, right? And the injustice committed by the city of New York onto people who are waiting for trial. Within that system, I heard about a small series of gardens in which people who were prisoners could learn to grow food, surrounded by barbed wire, surrounded by one of the most famous jail complexes in the world. I wrote to Rikers Island Jail Complex and asked for permission. And given how much negative news they received,
Mhm.
they said yes to me coming in and photographing the gardens. And then I was lucky enough to be able to collaborate with a writer, Jordan Kisner, and we published that work in Aperture magazine, and it was part of a traveling exhibition around prisons. The photographs were also exhibited in different museums and galleries. including Fredericks and Fraser, my gallery in New York. And, and it's been a meaningful collaboration, probably the most meaningful of which was the fact that the garden in Rikers Island Jail Complex used my photographs to advocate for an expansion of the garden program, which they were successful in. And so I find that in the constellation that I create and the different branches to the tree that is me,
Yeah.
the use of my photographs and the communities in which I photograph, with whom I photograph, is probably the most meaningful part of my life.
Right. That's
and I'm
incredible.
grateful to say too, like I'm grateful when people have prints of my photographs on their walls and they buy through galleries. What that does is it allows me to do these long form projects in which I'm giving images back to NGOs to use for advocacy, in which I'm putting stories into the news that very few magazines left could afford to have made. It's through the many branches of that tree that I find meaning in my life to speak about our relationship and interrelationship with nature.
Right. And it does. And it really kind of puts things into perspective for people. Would you say that with your audience when, they're buying your prints and hanging them on their wall? Have you gotten any feedback of them saying, wow, this really does put things into perspective, that one, nature's everywhere and it's obviously in the places that we least expect it?
I think that a photograph becomes art when it's both a window and a mirror. That when it shows someone something in the world that they may care about. And when there's also room in the image for someone to bring their own memories and meaning to. I recently visited some friends who have a print on their wall from Constant Bloom. It's of a red cabin in Norway, surrounded by the greenery of a mountain reflected in a lake. And I shared that the photograph is from Norway. And my friend's child said, no, it's from Maine, where our grandfather is. And they had a whole story about that photograph. And I love that because the meaning was still there. The meaning of a value of living close to wild places and of caring for wild places. But around that, there was imagination. And that's how I think art sits. It doesn't tell you what to think or feel. Maybe it encourages you to care, and it leaves room for you to bring your own story to it. And that's what I want from my work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it, because obviously where you were, but just like that, a child looks at it, it's like, hey, I know this place, and this is in Maine where we live. And I love that aspect of yeah, you have that photo was in Norway, but you have this creativity, just like you said. I think that's a really special way to look at your work and view it and appreciate it.
But I think that also, if we step back and say, like, where are we in terms of our relationship to nature today? And where is art in that relationship? And I think the role of art is a spark of imagination and a spark of care. It's a reminder, it's a window. If what I do in my life can encourage people to look through my photographs and find inspiration to go out and be outside and appreciate nature in a different way, I'm satisfied with that. I don't think I can change the world with my photographs, but I do think I can encourage people to care.
Yeah, and I think it gives people a lasting impression too. When they look at it and think of their own ways, they use your work as inspiration. And I want to ask you, as someone that creates this work and motivates people to be inspired, what inspires you when you're going out to work on a project?
I look for moments that I want to look at. Like, for instance, when I was in Rikers Island Jail Complex, there was barbed wire surrounding a beautiful garden. There were prisoners wearing striped outfits. And I made a number of photographs with those prisoners of them doing their work. And then there was one moment where some guinea fowls had gotten out of the barbed wire fence. And the prisoners were trying to encourage them to come back in, because it'd be safer inside the barbed wire than it would be outside, where they could be hurt by hawks or other animals. And there was a moment in which Troy, a very large man, was crouched on the edge of a barbed wire fence, carefully encouraging a baby guinea fowl chick to come back inside. and he got it to climb up on his hand, and he's holding this tiny chick in his big hand, crouched in his prison uniform, striped, inhumanely striped outfit, next to a barbed wire curving away in the distance.
Mhm.
That intimate moment of his relationship with that tiny baby bird spoke to me in a way that I wanted to look at it.
Mhm.
And it made me feel something. And then when I printed that photograph and published it in a book, in an exhibition, shared it in exhibitions, other people shared that it moved them too, but it started personal. It moved me.
Mhm. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because personally, that was my favorite photo that, I came across on your website. And it makes you feel something, because you have something that's so vulnerable in the baby fowl, or the chick. And then you have something that is, portrayed as, like you said, violent, and just seeing that vulnerability kind of come together was something that, I think really did speak to me. And like you said, and it's good to hear that it spoke to a lot of other people.
But the thing is that a lot of people want art on their walls that's pure, that's an
Mhm.
escape. I have an aunt when I was growing up who lived in New Jersey, so near my family's farm in eastern Long Island. And we'd go visit her, and her walls were covered in sunsets, pictures, photographs of sunsets.
Mhm.
And they were beautiful. And I remember looking at them and thinking they're beautiful, but also forgettable. Like one sunset feels like another sunset.
Right.
And when I started photographing, I thought maybe if everyone's looking at a sunset, I should turn my back to it and look at what the light is touching.
Mhm.
And when I looked at the world, everything feels complex. So to me, a photograph that works as art, it isn't, it's memorable because its meaning isn't completely clear. It resists understanding and has nuance in it. So I want to keep on looking. That photograph of Troy holding the baby bird
Mhm.
is, it's intimate, and also the barbed wire above him shows violence. Right?
Mhm.
Shows a very different aspect of humanity. And I think the contrast of those two, of the barbed wire and the baby bird, and his figure crouching between the two, holding the
Mhm.
baby bird, that conveys something that's truer to how I see, and I think works better at living longer in a viewer's memory.
Yeah, I'd
And
have
so
to.
similarly with it. Yeah.
No, yeah, I'm sorry
Mm,
to cut you off if you want to go, but I
sorry. Yeah.
completely agree with you. I think you said it best. It's that contrast that fascinates the human mind. It's something you don't see every day, and that just pulls you right in.
And I think that's important, where a lot of people now, if they're incentivized by Instagram or other social media,
Mm.
the encouragement there by an algorithm is to make an image that invites an immediate response,
Mhm.
like an immediate action of liking something.
Yeah.
And to me, best art doesn't, it compels me to look at it,
Mhm.
but I don't quite know what I'm thinking or feeling for a little while,
Right.
maybe even ever.
Mhm.
Like there's this line I love. It's a bad art is wow, huh? And good art is huh, wow. There's
The
something
root.
in there that I think about.
I love that, actually. I do. I've never heard that. I do. I'd really like that.
Welcome to my life. After
Yeah.
20 years of traveling and photographing and staying on so many people's couches, I have a head full of allegories, and I try to be careful how often I use them. But
That's okay.
yeah,
This is the platform to do that. We appreciate that. So
well,
go ahead.
I don't know. I was just going to say that the line a friend of mine shares is, make friends, don't network.
Hmm.
When you asked before about starting projects and what story I shared,
Hmm.
it, I have friends who are young artists or young journalists, and oftentimes they'll go into a place and they have their official assignment, and they'll they start kind of really clearly saying their official assignment. And I usually go in a little slow, and I'm honest about who I am. I'm honest about what I'm curious about. I try to phrase my projects in a way that people can really easily understand and tell their friends. And and then I make friends.
Hmm.
And from that, I often find stories that are better than what I assumed I would find in the first place.
Right.
I like that
That's
the world can teach me.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective to how you view art, what you do, the world around you. And I think that's something that I hope some people who listen to this, maybe they are like a hungry artist or a hungry journalist, can take pieces of that and use that in their field and in the real world.
Well, there's one other point with hungry artists and hungry journalists is that at any one moment, there's trends.
Hmm.
The world, a lot of the publications in the world tend to look at one story at a time.
Hmm.
And I found that when my projects too closely match the story of the time, they can get lost in the mix.
Sure.
But when I counterpoint the news that hooks it, it's like there's a main story and a nuanced counter story that carries more widely. In a way now with the butterflies, as so many countries are becoming more and more nationalistic,
Hmm.
there's a story from Constant Bloom about connection across borders that works as a counterpoint. And within that story, each of the photographs holds its own story,
Hmm.
right? So it can sit on someone's wall and live independently while still being connected to the larger project.
Right. Right. And with, taking that into consideration, talking about the counterpoint to a story or going out on a project and taking photographs, that it's not just about that. So I want to know kind of what your process is like, especially when a lot of your work is more candid shots. What do you go through
Mm,
when you're working on a new project?
I would actually, I wouldn't say I'm candid in the fact that I'm traveling in places, and because I'm becoming friends with people, they're often performing for me, collaborating with me to make the photographs.
Hmm.
So the photographs that I select and include in the book and the exhibitions feel candid, and often they're real moments that happen in a process of collaboration. I like photographing with, not of,
Hmm.
or having my photographs be with, not of.
Right. Right.
So, for instance, with Constant Bloom, when I started in 2021, when I was first able to travel again after a lot of the lockdowns, and I went to visit a scientist, Gerard Talavera, and his amazing team in Barcelona at a lab in the botanical gardens that overlook the city on one side and the Mediterranean Sea on the other. And I was lucky enough to be able to have the world leading scientists on painted lady butterflies show me how to find the butterflies.
Hmm.
And traveling with him into the mountains and along the coastline, photographing him and the team of scientists looking at the butterflies. At first, I thought I was doing a story about scientists and butterflies.
Hmm.
And then, as I was realizing that everywhere these painted lady butterflies go, they interact with people. And everywhere I went to photograph the butterflies, people would come up to me and ask what I was doing. And I would say, oh, I'm photographing this butterfly migration. These painted lady butterflies just crossed the Mediterranean Sea. And then they'd say, oh, can we help? Or they tell me a story about butterflies.
Hmm.
And so I started photographing the people I met while following butterflies. And then I started seeing the project as one in which the painted lady butterflies connect people across different landscapes and connect different landscapes across the borders of countries and continents.
Hmm.
That came from the process of following butterflies. It wasn't an assignment I gave myself and typed into a computer at first.
Yeah, and like you explained, you consider yourself like a tree with a lot of branches, and I think that goes with your work as well. You have the roots. You know what you want to do. You wanted to go document the butterflies and their migration, but then you start growing these branches of the people that you interact with. They become kind of a part of your canvas as well. I think that's really interesting how you kind of have a rough process, but you just kind of see where it goes along the way.
Well, for instance, one of my favorite photographs in the series is of a young female scientist named Raluca crouching on a rock surrounded by blooming flowers in Switzerland, looking down at a melting glacier as it twists like a river and disappears in the distance. And that photograph happened because I went to Switzerland to look for painted lady butterflies. that had flown there from Italy, that had flown there from across the Mediterranean and North Africa. And I didn't find them because there was a drought. And a lot of the lowlands in Switzerland were dry and brown, and the flowers weren't blooming. And painted lady butterflies need blooming flowers to survive.
Mm.
They live 5 weeks.
Wow.
Right? So the longest butterfly migration happens because painted lady butterflies move at the speed of blooming flowers across the world.
Interesting.
And the reason I called it constant bloom is because from the perspective of these butterflies, the world has to be constantly blooming.
It's fascinating.
I couldn't find those butterflies in lowland Switzerland. And Raluca had the idea to climb up the mountain and look for flowers near the glaciers where the air is humid. And so we spent days walking up into the mountains and we found blooming flowers. And from finding blooming flowers, we found the butterflies. I never would have imagined that I'd made a photograph that contrasts a blooming hillside with melting ice. But the project of following butterflies led me to become friends with Raluca, and that friendship with Raluca led to the idea of going up the mountains, which led to the finding of the flowers next to the ice.
All tree branches from one single root, it sounds like.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. We'll go with that. So you had this project with Constant Bloom. You traveled the world with it for this migration. As we kind of wrap things up here, I want to know what your future plans. Where do you want to explore next, or where do you plan to explore next?
I'll say that we talked earlier about Rikers Island Gel Complex.
Mm-hmm.
That was a success for me because the project was specific and hopeful, and it pointed to a solution that could grow. And because of my work, it did grow.
Mm-hmm.
So now as I'm doing further projects, new projects, and on one project is turning the book Constant Bloom into a film that can reach more people and collaborating with a very talented director and some incredible producers. Photographically, my new projects are looking at solutions, looking for hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a time in which so much of the news can cause so much stress, I think we need positive examples to grow towards. And my hope is that with my art, I can inspire people and at least point in the right direction.
Yeah. And I kind of give this last bit of piece of the interview to you. The floor is yours. How can people continue to follow along with what you do, continue to be inspired? Feel free to plug your website, any social media, or even upcoming exhibits. If you have one, you talked a little bit about your future plans, but the floor is yours, kind of wrapping this up.
Sure. It's funny, when I was younger, I'd have one thing, and now I feel like my life, like I said, has more branches.
Yeah.
If you want to see all the branches, take a look at the website at lucasfoglia.com, Foglia, because the G isn't pronounced. From there, it's easy to connect with the galleries and see the books and find them on my publishers' websites, etc. So there's a whole constellation of things coming up there. Yeah. In terms of any last words, I hope that when people listen to these projects, some of them might want books or prints, and just to learn about the stories I make. And if anyone's making their own stories, I'd say, again, the point I said about hope. Mm-hmm. I think it's important, especially in a time that can feel dark, to look for next steps and to celebrate them. So that's my hope for this conversation as it spreads in the world, is to nudge hope in other people too, as they make stories that they share in the world.
Yeah, you definitely opened my eyes to a few different things, and I hope for anyone listening that this conversation did the same. I definitely encourage everyone to check out Lucas's website and his work from over the years. Lucas, I can't thank you enough for hopping on here and joining us, taking the time out of your day.
No worries at all. Thanks for the company.
Yeah, thanks again, Lucas, and thank you everyone for listening. That's all the time we have today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Four Worlds Podcast. Until next time, you can catch up on the latest innovations shaping our world at tomorrowsworldtoday.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.